Replacing the steering components in this 97 Jeep Grand Cherokee. It's got a 4-liter in it. And what happened was we got the wrong tie rod ends for this rod here because the diameter is too large for that tie rod end to fit in there. And that was the tie rod ends that we ordered and received. And I do believe that it's correct, but it's correct for this bar down here and not for that one. There's the old hardware in the back. There's our replacement bar here, minus our tie rod ends that we don't have. One of the thoughts was I could use a 5.2 liter rod and just match up that distance from there to there, which would be equivalent from there to there on the old one, and this component of the new one. And then that got me into thinking that maybe what I could do is have the best of both worlds. See, that's a hollow shaft with a small diameter. That's a 1-inch shaft, solid, and it's just more heavy duty. What we have here are some old components from another vehicle. This was a 5.2 liter Jeep, and this is the old stuff that we've replaced out. This long rod here has a ball joint on the end, and that's not replaceable. That whole rod has to be replaced when that ball joint gives out, and the same is true for this one over here. I wanted to have a removable joint on this end as well as that end. And in order to do that, I have to cut the end of that shaft off there because this part of the shaft is a clockwise rotation when your coupler goes in, and then when your tie rod end goes in, that's a counterclockwise rotation to thread it in. So I need the threads off of this shaft here, and I want to put it on this shaft so then I can have a removable ball joint right here. This is our coupler that's going to thread in clockwise to go onto this threaded rod here, and this is going to be counterclockwise to thread into the coupler. What I've done over here is I've cut this end of the shaft off, but the problem is we've got this flat in here and it's deformed, so we don't have it consistently round. So I'm building it up with some weld here, and I'm going to build that up, and then I'm going to machine it so that we got a consistently round 1-inch diameter, and that 1-inch diameter will match here. And what we will simply do is take those components and transfer them over here. When I cut this shaft and weld that stub on here, then this side will become removable and replaceable as well. Here's that stub that we cut off, and we've welded the end. We've built this up with weld all the way around, and now we're going to turn it down to the same diameter as this shaft right here. We've roughly kind of got this laid out here, and then that will be the rough location of welding this in place onto this shaft here. First, we'll turn that down to the proper diameter. We've taken and measured that distance at 42 inches from one tie rod end to the other, and we're using that back one as a guide. So that was set at the 42-inch mark, and then we've got our front one here where we're trying to line it up, take some measurements, and find out where we want to cut it. We've machined our end down, so that's going to be the same diameter as this. This is where I've made the mark where we'll cut this, and then we're going to weld that stub to this shaft here. And when I was doing that, I tried to equal out my threaded portions on both ends. So that's roughly a little over 5/8 sticking out on either end there. And then again on this side, so everything is even and equal. We still have lots of room in here for adjustment to go in. Remember that we're going to have that same space on both sides, so technically we've got roughly 2 inches of adjustment total here. The ends have been prepped on both these bars here, so we're going to chamfer that at like, I don't know if that's quite a 45-degree angle, but we're going to chamfer that at an angle, and we want to make sure we got a space in there. I'm going to fill that with weld, and then it's going to work it out until we get to the outside diameter here. I have a piece of angle iron here, and I just got a flat welded on there. I can hold that in my vise, and I'm using this wire to hold everything together while I tack it all up and start welding. Here's the rod after finished welding that stub. We've got both ends on there, and we have it measured out at our rough 42-inch center to center. That was what the old one was, so that's our starting point. We'll install it that way, and then it'll get tweaked when it goes in for wheel alignment. This side here, that's the piece that we cut out. We finished welded our stub in here. We got our turnbuckle or adjusting nut, whatever you want to call that, and then we have our tie rod end here. What I did is I tried to center everything here, so it's roughly a little over 5/8 thread exposed on both sides. And again over here, and I do believe the idea is once it's installed, they're just going to turn this one way or the other, which is going to expand it and retract it after it's installed. While we're working on those steering arms with the tie rod ends, we got them removed. This is a good time to get at the sway bar bushings and links here. I've replaced the sway bar bushings up there, and everything's loose, as you can see. So we're going to assemble everything loose, and then once it goes where it wants to be, then we'll tighten it all down. So we've got those bushings in there for the sway bar up front, and now we're going to assemble our links. Here's some part numbers for anyone who's interested. So that is the sway bar link right there. There's the part number for that. And this is the part number for those bushings that go into the front sway bar there. And that'll be those bushings right there. I've welded a nut here on the ear. That's going to be where the bottom of the sway bar link gets connected. I don't know what the factory size is because I've switched this over to 1/2-inch bolts. So that's going to be a 3/4 socket on that nut that's welded on there, and likewise for the bolt that is going to thread into it. That bolt's going to go to the bottom of this link right here, and then up at the top we had a couple different sizes. The old one was a 17mm socket to remove and install that, and the new one is a 15mm socket to remove and install that. But again, in my case, what I've done is I've fashioned a 3/4 nut. In my application, it's going to be a 3/4 wrench to remove the nut on the top and a 3/4 to remove the bolt in the bottom. We've got the sway bar links in there, and what I suggest is you hang it from the top first, and then as it's hanging from the top, you can line up the bottom and put that in on both sides. So everything is initially loose. We have that nut on the top loose, those nuts are loose, and then what I did was I drive that in first. I'm going to drive that bolt into my fixed nut right here, and once that's driven in there tight, then I'm going to use a locker nut here, and I'm just going to put that locker nut on the end, and I'm going to tighten that down. I'm just going to use the impact to tighten up the other side, and I'll use it to tighten this side as well. The top one is the next one that I want to tighten. That's going to be, in my case, a 3/4 socket or wrench. Once I've tightened both the top and bottom of the sway bar link, then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to tighten these bolts that are holding this bushing down. The reason is I want the links on the end done first, kind of center this thing, put it where it wants to be, and then once it's there, then we tighten up those front bushings. We finished installed the front sway bar here with the links and the bushings. Everything's all tight. The only thing left to do is to grease these joints here on both sides, and then we have our front steering arms with the tie rods out front. Out front here, we finished all of our hardware. What we had done was we had cut off a piece of another bar, and we've welded it on there, so that's a solid bar now, and we got two threaded tie rod ends on each end, whereas before it was only a threaded end on one and then a complete connection similar to this one here on the other end. We're going to put these components on pause for a moment. We're not going to install them yet because I want to change the upper and lower ball joints on both sides before we install these components. Before we install those tie rod ends, which get connected right there on the end, we want to replace our upper and lower ball joints. We're going to replace the upper ball joint here
and the lower ball joint right there.
After replacing those ball joints, then we'll assemble our tie rod ends.